In video with Alex again, and this is for Social Work 213. My name is Doug.
And I'm Diana.
So let's start with some questions. So, what are the are there certain social norms or issues that could cause a barrier for homeless people to access resources?
So to state the obvious, I think some of the biggest barriers are going to be linked to finances. So, for example, a lack of transportation is going to be a huge barrier, as well as the inability to find and access resources. I think being that people who don't have things like cell phones are so cut off from the outside world or just don't have the certain knowledge needed to be able to know what's really out there to help. I think the biggest barriers are going to be things like that. So, I mean, the lack of the transportation to maybe get to appointments or job interviews even, or the lack of information provided to know what's out there to help, and the inability to really communicate with the people that they should and need to be able to communicate with to find those resources and access them are going to be the biggest issues.
Okay, and you are a social worker, correct?
Yes.
And what is it you do?
So currently I work for the state of Iowa. I do investigations for Child Protective Services. Previously, I did the same work in Nebraska for about 3.5 years. And then prior to that in Nebraska, I also worked for juvenile probation. So I also come from a background that is very similar to the youth that I've worked with. So I did follow a career path that enabled me to become the person that I needed when I was a homeless youth and a homeless young adult.
And I think that's outstanding. Now, working with youth, you have probably come across a lot of homeless youth. And I would think that you're probably the perfect person for this job because you have the experience of being homeless, between two different places and having repeatedly experienced it. I think that's really wonderful. Um,
So, what other struggles do individuals from this culture face that you would want social workers to understand better?
That stereotypes are bullshit. So, assuming that an individual is panhandling just so that they can go get drugs or just so that they can hustle somebody or because they don't want a job, it's not true. We have, of course, there are people who subscribe to that idea and that functionality and it works for them, and that's fine. The overwhelming majority, just based on personal and professional experience, the reason that they are in that situation is because of personal choices they made. And I wish that more social workers would understand that we are all one or two bad decisions away from being in that exact same position. I think it's also highly important to recognize that there are differences between the backgrounds that a lot of us social workers are coming from versus the backgrounds that the individuals in the community are coming from. So for example, in my experience at my previous job in Nebraska, the majority of social workers we were hiring at the time were young, white, females from an upper middle class background. And unfortunately, a lot of time that's not going to be an effective person to really send out into these communities unless they have the knowledge of the cultural norms and backgrounds that are involved in these communities and involved in homelessness or in certain poverty levels or certain types of areas. And I really wish a lot of social workers would wake up to that because approaching somebody who's been through these things and you having no knowledge of it, you have preconceived notions, you have a complete ignorance of a lot of the things they've gone through, you're not going to be an effective social worker until you educate yourself.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think that's why it's so important that as social workers, we are making sure that we're practicing our 6 core values so that we can help people to the best of our ability and come from a place of understanding, even if it's not a situation that we relate to personally.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I believe there is a lot of there is a significant problem of just having the formal knowledge or that or experience not experience, yeah, formal knowledge of the homelessness population or just of anything that a social worker is taught, but unless they have the experience in that field and the experience with that population, with even just the most basic general understanding of what it is that this population, this demographic has to go through, yeah, they will not be effective social workers. Which again, your feedback, your input, greatly appreciated. And I like to believe that your response will help further future social workers understand what is to come and what it is they should work on. Those are just the questions all I had for you. Thank you again, Alex, for your time, and you have yourself a good night.
Yes, thank you. I hope you have a good night.
Thank you. You do the same.